Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co author of Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports How to Think Like a Professional DFS Player. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass where, alongside James McCool, I teach you about the game theory of DFS. Doesn't matter the sport, NFL, NBA, MLB, doesn't matter. You could be playing LOL. It's the game constructs of what daily fantasy sports is. Not about picking the players, but building lineups that have positive expected value. And if you don't understand expected value, that's what we talk about. Like how to view projections, how to look at correlation, how to look at leverage, all those things that you could apply to any contest, whether you're playing cash games like double ups or head to heads, or you're playing GPPs, whether you're playing large field, small field. Are you building one lineup? Are you building three? Are you building 20? Are you building 150? It all applies because I get those questions all the time. Well, if I'm doing this, does it apply to me? It applies to anyone that plays daily fantasy sports that wants to take it more seriously, wants to turn themselves from a losing player to a break-even player, from a break-even player to a winning player, or someone that plays casually but wants a little bit more of a shot at winning a big payday in one of these large field contests. And I'm joined by Erik Beimfohr once again. We're doing this every week on Tuesdays primarily, and there's, as I say about the course, there's no better marketing than winning, right?
Right. Yes. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm ready for this show, because I get to talk to the one of the big winners of the week, and maybe you can, I'm that guy that I want to go from a break-even player to a winning player. You were talking about me just now this NFL season. I can't break through like you have, so now I'm just going to pick your brain for a little while and see if I can actually get to the winner circle.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that you take a look at my lineups and my exposures, and you know exactly why I played the lineups
Yeah.
that I played, and you also probably saw that in the $9 slant, I came in first place out of 65,000 entries. I had
Hmm.
77 entries in there, $693. And for people that are wondering about, like, well, why 77? Like, first off, I don't max enter anything because my risk tolerance is low. I'm a nit. So, like, I have a certain amount that I play, cash versus GPP, and I'm also like I'm a little bit of like obsessive compulsive, that like my number of lineups has to be like an even number. So I'm not just
Same.
because I'm playing the $3 20 max, so that's 20 entries. I'm playing the $8 3 max, so that's 3 entries. So like everything equaled out to 120 entries. So like that's and the number of the dollars was a zero. So like as long as those two things go together, it looks good on my DraftKings on my upcoming screen. It makes no
Exactly.
sense. There's no reason to do that. It just
Yeah.
I'm gonna build around that many lineups anyway and play those contests. And whether it be 64 entries or 78 entries, it just happened to work out that it's 77. So people
Yeah.
have asked that. I'm like, there's no actual strat. There's no thinking behind that other than I just like zeros and fives on my
Right.
screen because it feels better.
I mean, that sounds like really stupid, right? But I believe like play DFS like however makes you happy, right? Like you're playing, not max entering, multi entering. I'm playing a couple teams because it makes me feel better. Like I can't stomach managing all the different teams, and I suck at it. But like it makes me feel more comfortable doing it. And the same same way as you, I don't do the dollar amount, but the entry amounts. Like when it's on my upcoming screen, like if I entered one of my teams in 46 contests, I'm like, well, this I can't do this. I got to find four more. I got to find four more contests to go enter because I want it to be 50. But it makes me feel bad. I feel good going into the slate, and it's the little things. It's the
Right, you
little
know how
things that
hard it
people
is
don't.
when I'm like, I'm gonna enter the $12 single entry, and I'm like, 12? I need to find an $8 contest so I can get to, or a $3 contest to get to a 5 or a 0. So I guess if there's another $8 entry I could put in, I'll find it. But the thing that I always do since I play large field contests is that first place has to be higher than the total amount of entries, dollar amount that I'm playing, because I play all unique lineups. That's why sometimes it's very hard. If you go on Roto Grinders Results DB, you could see exposure levels on DraftKings at least. FanDuel doesn't have the downloadable CSVs of like the person's exposures. You could go and
Yep.
see what Mocklovin did. You could see what Utica did. You could see what Petty Theft did in those contests. But a lot of times, players are building a 150 build and then putting like their best 3 teams here, and it's just a 150 build in total. Me, I play all unique lineups because it's just like I just want a big one of them. Like, and I try to put the highest leverage lineups in the largest field contests and the lowest leverage ones in the smallest field contests. Sometimes it's crunch time towards a slate, and I don't have time, and I just it's the rand function, I guess. I guess it's just random. So I need to know that like I'm not thinking in terms of, well, if I only played this lineup in another contest, like the lineup that I won $50,000, if I played it in the Millie Maker, which I didn't have any entries in, I didn't play it because as the season goes on, that first place prize gets even bigger percentage
Worse.
of the pool.
Yeah.
It would have came in second for $150,000, but like as long as first place is higher, like I had $1,500 in entries in GPPs, which includes 550 in like single entry and 3 max. So like I'm hand building those teams. So I need first place plus my cash. I'm playing, like $7,500 in cash games, that type of thing, which I did horrible.
Same. Same.
Which is great. That it's like I don't even care at this point. I don't even care. I come in first place in that contest. I'm good.
Yep.
So in total, I'm playing like $9,000. So like first place has to be more than $9,000 because I don't want to win one of those contests and lose money on the day. Like it makes no sense to me. So if the contest is 5,000 to first, like I'm just not in those contests. I like playing those contests. I may play those contests in MLB when I'm playing $1,000 worth of volume. If I'm playing NBA with $2,000 worth of volume. So do you have to do that? No. It's a more of a psychological thing where. I don't want to have it could have been in that contest and whatever, but at least it's more than, at least I profited on today. It's worse if, it won $1,500. That lineup won $1,500 in a 3 max, and I lost money on the day because it wasn't in the $9 slant. Like that it defeats the purpose of what I'm doing. So there are some, you get some byproduct of being kind of an OCD type of person.
But I think the general point of what you're saying is true. I have some buddies who play very casually, DFS, and I find that people that that are my buddies, they're growing as DFS players, but but they haven't figured out these little things that we're talking about. Like they'll fire away at just the random contest, right? I made a lineup. I'm throwing this one in the $12 single entry. And then I made this lineup and I'm throwing it in the slant. And then I made this lineup and I'm throwing it in some small 150 man field or whatever. And so you run into that exact issue that you just had. They're like, oh God, I put that lineup in this contest and it won me $500, but it would have won the slant or whatever. And so having some sort of plan, it's different for everybody. Exactly what you outlined, I think, is the most logical way to do it, and it's a little bit different for me. If I'm playing like 2 or 3 teams, but still the general thought process is similar. That if you're like, it's so hard to make a really good team. Like you did Sunday. It's so hard to make that team. You may not make a team that good ever again, like the rest of the year. To do it and run good and put up that kind of a score, you need to maximize, your profits. Not maximize like you were talking about with the Millie, but maximize within your like general constraints, your little, ecosystem that you're playing from within. And I do think that's something, that never really crossed my mind before talking to like some of my more casual friends, that they are kind of just firing away at contests, right? And especially because I will say things like, for me, smaller field, like, so if you're playing $50, I want to play in like smaller fields because that's how you can grow your bankroll as more of a casual player, because that's what has worked for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but like they take that and it's like, oh, well, there's this $12 contest with 120 people in it, and they're firing off a different lineup into that, but then they're also playing the Millie and the slant and all of that and trying to, figure out the best strategy for that, I think is more important than people give it credit.
Well, I think it's more the fact of building the lineup for the contest. So the downside of that you hear a lot amongst average DFS players is I'm playing $50, and I'm playing one Millie Maker entry, $12 single entry. I'm playing a couple of $3 play action entry. They're playing a cup, and each of those lineups are in different field contests. And because they only have 5 lineups, they're playing like, well, I can't take risks, and it's like, no, if you have one entry, you could play one entry in the Millie Maker. But you can't play it as if I need to get $30, right? A 1.5x. Oh, I can't lose this $20. No, that entry should be the entry where you're 90% of the time will not cash. Just make it for, even if that's your only lineup, right? In Showdown especially, where people, I'm going to just play the best play. No, play the crazy lineup that could be duplicated maybe only 3 times. You win $200,000 on. It doesn't matter that it's your only lineup. Because if $10 means that much to you, you shouldn't be playing DFS to begin with. And if it means enough to you that you want to maximize your chance of like getting a little money back, you shouldn't be playing those large field contests at all. Let alone one entry. If you build 150 entries that are all safe, you're negative EV. So like why the hell would you do one that isn't like, you build one and you go, who's the chalk? You look at the four most owned players and you X them out, and you go, now build the lineup. And well, what happens if they get there? Well, then you lose. Then you lose your $20, and that's that you can't be afraid to lose. People looked at my lineups, and I had 77 lineups in this lineup. There were tons of bad lineups. 21 cashed, right? But they were all based on leverage plays. They were all of them, and I want to give a shout out to because only because he rarely ever compliments people. It's your buddy. Ship my money, right?
Adam, yeah,
right. On the Awesome Review show, said that he liked my lineup, and then no, but that's not the compliment. What I considered the compliment was that he said it almost felt like it's a hand built lineup with the correlations that go into it, and
I agree.
It's not a hand built lineup. I that's why I use 50 groups. I mean, and all leverage play. Like that is what I'm doing. Like that. I came from a hand building background. I know Peter Overzet. It's the hand builders versus the opto bros, right? On his bankroll challenge stuff. I'm a hand builder. I played soccer for a year and a half, and I played a cash lineup, and I would build like up to 15 GPP lineups, but I would always do it by hand. I could build 15 by hand. And soccer, there's correlation, there's leverage. It's the same concepts in DFS. And then once I moved over and like, okay, I'm going to expand into baseball, I did the same thing. I'm just like, I'm going to build 15 lineups, and I'm going to build them by hand. I'm going to stack 5-3. I'm going to stack 5-1. I'm going to do whatever and build the line. And I play large field, so these are all risky-ish type of lineups. And then once you learn the dynamics of like, okay, well, I could get leverage here, and then that's going to be negatively correlated with that. And then if I stack this and play this pitcher, it's like, okay, I could hand build. Well, now you could go into an optimizer and go, well, I want those types of lineups. Right. Like for if I'm playing this team, this stack size, I'm more likely to get an expensive running back. So I need to up my expensive running back exposure. I need to have expensive running backs in my pool, right? I can't be like, I'm fading Madison and Davis and Henry. I'm playing all the cheap ass running backs, and then also want to play Damiere Byrd in lineups like that. That's also cheap in a New England stack. Like, no, I'm gonna need if it shows up. Like I saw, for instance, these are the types of things that you think of that come when you hand build. Learning to use an optimizer. If you learn how to hand build, the optimizer is a piece of cake. It's just features. Yeah. So I was getting a lot in my builds, a lot of Darnell Mooney at 3K. I was getting a ton of him. But, can you guess the reason?
I know why.
What's the reason why I was getting a ton of Darnell Mooney in my lineups?
You had the expensive running backs, and he was 3K wide receiver that projected for whatever.
Who was my most exposed running back in my player pool?
Probably Henry.
No, Henry I was way under on Henry.
Madison.
No, you're not getting it. I guess I have to teach you, Eric.
Yeah,
because you're not used to using optimizers, so you don't know how.
No, never.
Right.
Literally never.
we talk about correlation, right? So you're going to build a stack that's like 2 plus 1, 3 plus 1, 3 plus 2, something like that. And then
Okay, I got it.
if in your other spots you could get a correlation of like 1 plus 1, like you tend to lean towards that. I was like 50%, 52% exposure on Mike Davis, which is
Mike Davis,
on the Panthers. So the 1-1 would be Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, and Darnell Mooney is the cheap receiver that has a decent point per dollar value. So it's jamming in all my Mike Davis, and a lot of my Mike Davis lineups, it's jamming in Darnell Mooney to get that 1-1. So now I have to I'm at a build where he's 27% exposed. Like I have to limit that. I have to find a way. Because do I want to play? Hey, I could say I want to play all the Darnell Mooney. I didn't want to. I wanted to play enough of them. I was playing Bears stacks with Davis runbacks and stuff like that. Obviously, that didn't get there. But when if you're hand building, you'd go, okay, Davis, Mooney, and then you play the Atlanta, Minnesota stack around it, and you do something like that. Well, since either I had a choice, how do I get less Darnell Mooney? Well, I have to lower my Davis exposure. I didn't want to lower my Davis exposure, so I would go in, and those 1-1 correlations in lineup HQ, you could set percentages on those. So I had to start lowering. Like instead of a 70%, 70% of my lineups, I want at least a 1-1 in there. I'm lowering that down to 60 and then seeing what happens. Lowering it down to 50 and seeing what happens. Because I take a look at the running back opposing wide receiver correlations and I go, well, what other running backs do I have in my pool? Well, I have Devontae Freeman, but I want a lot of Terry McLaurin. So it's like, okay, so that's good. I want a lot of that percentage to be that. I look in there and I see Jonathan Taylor. So I'm like, okay, that means I'm going to get a bunch of Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, right? I already have a bunch of Trey Burton. So, like, I can't sit there and go, well, why do I have 8% Higgins? Why do I have 7% Boyd? And I go, no, because that makes sense with the one. If I want less of that, I gotta bump that down. But these are all the considerations you make when you hand build, right? Right, Eric? When you're making a 150 power sweep lineup or a game changer lineup, like you're fitting in, if you're playing a 3+1 or a 2+1 skinny stack, and you're gonna go, well, I'm gonna play Derrick Henry, and you go, well, I'm gonna play Derrick Henry, and then I'm gonna play Will Fuller on the other side. I'm gonna play Brandon Cooks on the other side. If it fits, if you had a choice with Derrick Henry in your lineup, and you had a spot for like a 5K range wide receiver, why are you playing Chase Claypool? You should be playing Brandon Cooks. If you have Terry McLaurin already in your lineup, why are you playing Chase Claypool? Play Darius Slayton in that lineup. Even if you're not stacking the game with the quarterback, like they project close enough. Obviously, Claypool projected higher. Okay, I get that. But not Claypool's 25% owned and Slayton's 4% owned. So, like, it's not 5 times ceiling probability. So that's the play whatever you want type of, the play whatever you want method to say. Like, all your choices that you make in your lineup, because you're hand building. But I'm hand building also. It's just that I'm programming a tool to do all my hand building for me. So when you build the lineup like that, you typically start with the stack. Right. And then once you plug in, it's like, okay, you have the quarterback, 2 wide receivers, and the opposite wide receiver. Now you have running back slots that you have to fill. So in that flex, that if you're playing wide receiver in the flex, whatever running back that you play in the running back slot, you probably are going to use that flex spot for the opposing wide receiver if it fits, because that makes the most sense to maximize for correlation. Now, obviously, in your smaller field contest, you may not have to maximize to that extent where it has to be that way.
Yeah.
But when I'm playing 65,000 person fields, like I by default, I want that correlation if I can get it. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Like, that Brandon Cooks lineup could have easily been Will Fuller and then some other defense. It could have been that. But I was just trying to leverage number one on the chalk pieces. If Madison and Thielen fail, who succeeds? Jefferson. Okay? Most people, if they're stacking that game, will play Cousins, not Ryan. Right? And if they're playing Ryan, they're most likely playing Ridley, not Julio. So, like, there you go. There's the stack. And then you go look and go, well, if I'm not playing Madison, I have room for a 7K running back, so I'm going to play Derrick Henry in this lineup. And then instead of Chase Claypool, I play Brandon Cooks. I mean, if I'm playing Trey Burton, why not? If I have room for like a high 4K wide receiver, why not T Higgins? It could have been Tyler Boyd, and the Steelers defense could have gone down to some other defense. It could have been that. Just didn't so happen to be that. But are these the types of things that you take into consideration when you hand build your single entry and 3 max lineups?
Yeah. So first, you can tell how I literally never think about like player exposures and that within the context of like Darnell Mooney and all that, because I start like.
Well, you only have 5 lineups. I mean,
exactly.
you don't need to do. I mean, like if you have 20% exposure, it's one lineup.
Right.
Exactly. To me, I have to learn how the optimizer is trying to maximize for median projection until you tell it otherwise. So you have to think in terms of it's dumb. It's only as good as you. So you have to. It doesn't like Darnell Mooney. It's just you're telling it that you want a secondary correlation at all costs, and you want a ton of Mike Davis. So you're going to get Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney in a ton of lineups. And if you want to have less of that correlation, you have to intervene in some way where you're not getting as much of that.
Yeah. Whereas I'm intervening from like the start, right? Like, because I'm not you're trying to take what's in your brain and put it into this software, this math formula, essentially, right? And so it's doing its best as it can based on the inputs that you've provided to it. But you, like you said, you have to make those tweaks. Whereas I'm starting from scratch. It is only my brain. I'm the one clicking the buttons into the lineup, and I'm starting at that. It's kind of a combination of things. I generally would say it's like starting with like the game environment type of thing, because when you're only playing a couple of teams, you as like everyone has to narrow it down. Like the people get mad about like the play whoever you want thing, because it's funny and like kind of trolling or whatever. But like everybody has to narrow down their pool like to a certain extent, right? You're not literally playing every single game. So you start to narrow it down. It's easy. I don't want to say easier for you, but you have a little bit more flexibility on deciding exactly how you want to attack what games. And so, start to narrow that down. But how you narrow that down for me, can be tons of different things, right? Like I might like the Titans game the most, so it's on my list. But then we start, you have the 5, 6, 7, whatever games that are on my list. I wasn't gonna stack the Steelers game or whatever. Not saying you can't stack the Steelers game. If you like that game more than me, by all means, it doesn't matter. Like you said, play whoever you want. But for me, it wasn't on my list. So you start working your way down that list, and like you said with the Vikings. Okay, that's an interesting game because it's going to be kind of popular, but there's really interesting leverage points in that game. So that that game like moves up a rung for me in terms of priority, right? Or you could probably do it with that. It was kind of hard with the Titans game because every goddamn Titan was popular.
Not Humphreys.
I was just going to say
I played all my Tannehill stacks. I did not want to play without Humphreys because. Then I'm literally playing the exact chalk. Just same for Stafford Galladay type of thing. Yeah. It's like, how do I play so much of that? And we talk about leverage points. I just want to intervene for a second because maybe people don't understand leverage points. So I'm going to use 3 examples. I'm going to use obviously the example that you mentioned. Madison and Thielen are chalk, right? Mm-hmm. Leverage would be whoever's negatively correlated with that, and that would be Jefferson. Okay,
and Irv was chalk too.
Right, and Irv was chalk also. Right. Then, like in the Titans game, like okay, everyone's playing AJ Brown and Jonnu Smith, but no one's playing Adam Humphries. If Adam Humphries catches a touchdown, it's a touchdown that comes out of Henry. It's a touchdown that comes out of AJ Brown. It's a touchdown that comes out of Jonnu Smith. Right. So I mean, so every time that Humphries catches the ball, you're getting more points because he's 3% owned. Over the 20+% owned of all the other, like all of those lineups, it's like they're going in reverse while you're going up. So that's called relative value. You're gaining relative value. And then here's the other, and then like I was getting trolled a bit because my terrible take. I don't have takes, but I have like, here are leverage points that you could use. I'm yelling at people going, I'm playing a bunch of Adrian Peterson, right? And yes, you could have played DeAndre Swift instead. It's the same play. It's the running back of the team that everyone has the passing game of, right? Yeah. And they're cheap. So you could jam in these 6K wide receivers into your lineup with ceiling. So I'm going, everyone thinks the Lions is going to pass the ball in the Jaguars. Galladay and Stafford are chalk. Obviously, Marvin Jones, that's a leverage point. Instead of going from Galladay, you go to Galladay to Jones because they're negatively correlated. But if I played Jones, I felt like I needed to play Stafford, and Stafford was already chalky as the quarterback. I wanted to bust 2 players instead of 1 player, right? So if Galladay busts, most likely Stafford busts. And Stafford's 10% owned. Galladay's 22% owned. Now I bust 32% of the lineups. If I play Marvin Jones, I need to root for Stafford in some aspect. The opposite is the Steelers. So on the Steelers, I went low on Claypool, and I played some James Washington. Not much. Played some Juju. Not much. I played him, I think, 2 or 3 lineups because he didn't project well. So, I mean, he didn't fit into much. But Ben Roethlisberger was not popular, right? So I'm perfectly fine with the passing game doing well. I just don't want it to go to Claypool. So who's negatively correlated with that? The other receivers. I didn't have James Conner in my pool. If Ben Roethlisberger was more popular, then I would have played James Conner, because now I'll take the running game while people are taking the passing game. People weren't taking the passing game in the Steelers game. They were just taking Claypool. So I could bust him, but the quarterback didn't match. So I'm not busting the passing game. So I'm now going to the negatively correlated other pieces of the passing game. I could have went with Conner there, but like that's why the Lions, I went with the running back, and the Steelers, I went with the other wide receivers, because I'm just looking for how could I bust as many lineups as possible in a lineup? And it doesn't mean I'm not playing those guys, because in other lineups, I'm trying to bust other people, right? Like, like I'm playing Stafford Galladay. I played 5 Stafford Galladay lineups because they projected well. But in those lineups, I'm trying to bust Claypool. I'm trying to bust Madison. I have Jefferson in that lineup because I already have a chalk piece. So now I have to try to bust the other chalk. So even in my lineup that won, I played Henry and Davis, who were 2 of the chalkiest running backs. But I tried to bust Madison, and I tried to bust Claypool at price range. I tried to bust, the guys that are in those ranges, in those price points. That was the purpose of that one lineup. The next lineup may have a completely different purpose. It may actually be to bust a chalk that's in my other lineup, and then it turns out that one of them does well and one of them does really, really bad. But I just need one of these lineups to come in first place, and it makes up for the 7,000 other lineups that didn't do well. I mean, it makes my year. I mean, this literally, like, this is why I play. I'm not afraid to lose. I lose in GPP 90+% of the time. So, like, I just need one or 2 of these a year, and I'm wildly profitable. So I just want to highlight this is stuff that you'll learn in the audio course, like what leverage points are. And when you're hand building, Eric, I mean, the difference is that I'm devoting a lot of my bankroll to try to bust a lot of different leverage points. You kind of have, like we joked around on the last episode. It's like I'll pick my favorite 10 and play all of them. You're picking your favorite 2.
Right. And that's because obviously I'm playing less teams, but
also you don't need to bust everyone because you're playing smaller fields.
Exactly. So I'm trying to pick the couple of spots in a 200-man field, sometimes less, that instantly catapult me to the top. That like all those different leverage points that you are attacking, they're like, you're basically you don't know which obviously don't know which exact one is going to propel you. So you're playing all the appropriate angles that you should be. There's only 200 teams. Like I'm playing against 195 teams, or some of these contests I'm playing against 50 people. I don't play the Thunderdome, but if you play the Thunderdome, 25, 30 people, you don't even really need to bust Claypool chalk. You just need 2 things to go right? And it depends on the week. It depends on the week too. When we get, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but sometimes you get that Kamara. So let's use the 1 week Kamara against the Lions. Right? I didn't do it because I'm a donkey, but he's 85% owned. He was literally 85% owned in high stakes tournaments. It's unreal. And everybody had Troutman too. So I don't care about, for me personally, in a field like that, I wouldn't care about also going after the Claypool chalk and also going after the Henry chalk and also you pin in on that one. If Kamara does not go off and if Adam Troutman does not go off, what happened? And so there was people had different opinions on that exact leverage point, but the point being, like in the fields that I'm playing, sometimes there's just one thing I have to do, and it sucks because the probability of it working, like you said, 90% of the time you're going to lose, but you have to be willing to lose. And so kind of going back to what we were initially talking about, you have to break down the slate, and those leverage points have to be a very, very critical part of your initial process, because the games that you're going after and the secondary correlations that you've talked a lot about already that you're going after are like wholly dependent upon that leverage. Like, yes, the correlation is an important thing. Playing, and I guess this is even like a leverage point, but playing Devontae Parker and Jamison Crowder, which I guess technically was maybe some leverage off of Gaskin, who came in a lot higher owned than I think I expected. But playing random secondary correlations is good. Correlation is good. You should want that. But correlation that provides you leverage on the field is just like so much more valuable. So your priorities, it's different for you and how you're putting together that priority list for 80 teams or 120 teams than it is for me for 2 or 3. But I have to rack and stack that list of priorities, and you're setting exposures and you're setting rules and correlations based on that. I'm punching in 8 guys into 2 teams based off of that. And like you said, Henry was chalk and you played him. Mike Davis was chalk and you played him, and it was still like the most perfectly leveraged and correlated lineup that you could have. So like when people, we were talking a little bit before the show, when people get on Twitter and say like, oh, Derrick Henry was a fish play, it's like, well, yeah, maybe. Let me see the team that you put him on.
Right. I think I would agree. I think in cash games on DraftKings, I would lean more towards that sentiment for a median, a guy that is not involved in the passing game on a full point PPR site, when we already have Davis and Madison there, and the 7K build for running back was obviously not optimal.
Not optimal, yeah.
Like I get it, but that's why. Why do you think I stress in the course so much that it's all about lineups and contests? It's not about players. It's for your contest, Henry could have been the dumbest play in that lineup.
Yeah.
In my contest, in my lineup, it could have been the smartest play. And because even in the difference in ownership, like I wanted to talk to you about this, Eric. You have to do the leveling more than I do, because I'm playing in a lot of the larger field. You get a lot more dead money in it.
Yeah.
Were you shocked? Because I went in this direction also. I think most sharp players saw that it happened again, Eric. It happened again.
I knew
Atlanta, Minnesota and the Tennessee Titans game were the supposed chalk. Okay, and they were the 2 most popular games. Most people identified, most sharper players, it seemed, got on the bandwagon with the highest total game on the slate, which was the Packers-Buccaneers. And I'm taking a look right now in the luxury box, which is the highest stakes, the $3,000 entry contest. Davante Adams was 28% owned. Okay, he was the second highest owned wide receiver. A.J. Brown was number 1 at 30%, and Davante Adams was 28% owned. In the play action, the $3 play action, the small data, 100,000 a first, he was 15% owned. Okay, so like I'm playing Davante Adams in those contests because I don't play the luxury box. I don't play the Wildcat. In the Wildcat, Davante Adams was 25% owned. Let's take a look at Chris Godwin. Okay, Chris Godwin in the luxury box was 18% owned. Can you believe that? Because in the play action, Godwin was 7% owned. So I'm playing a ton of Godwin, Adams, single skinny stacks, that type of stuff, and I'm playing them in my contest. If I were playing those high stakes contests, and I thought Davante Adams and Godwin would be 2 of the most chalky receivers, I would have loaded the hell up on the Atlanta-Minnesota game as much as possible. Like I was light on Thielen. I was light on Madison. I mean, Madison was still high owned in the high stakes. I mean, the running backs. I mean, the game was still owned. I mean, Derrick Henry was 29% in the luxury box. AJ Brown was 30% in the luxury box. Davis was 31%. Gaskin was higher owned in the high stakes. Why? Because everyone wanted to play Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin. So you needed cheap running backs. So this is what I mean by, like, if it you have to base it on the owner. That's why when I say all the time when we review shows, I'm with Stevie on the Morning Grind on Roto Grinders, and this is why I look at Results DB every morning. That I could only judge my decisions by, had I known that, would I have done anything differently? Okay, and the only thing that I could better predict is what the field is going to do, not what the players are going to do. So had I known that Alexander Madison would only put up 4 points, I'd have him in 0% of my lineups. But how do you predict that? You can't. But I could better predict ownership and go, had I known so many people were going to pivot to the Green Bay Tampa Bay game, I would have played much less of it. I actually would have flipped on the other side. So this is what I mean by I don't have takes. Who are your plays? If everyone thought, if the groupthink was this week that Falcons defense is horrible, they'll get burned. Jefferson's in a prime spot for a 100-yard game, and Jefferson was 28% owned, and Thielen was 10% owned. You know who I'd have more of? I'd have more Adam Thielen. So it's like I'm not predicting what's going to happen. It's just like the disparity of the ownership doesn't make sense. And I'm just, what are you doing? I'm doing the opposite. Doesn't mean I'm not playing that guy, because that guy can fit because they have high probability. They're owned because they have high probabilities. So did you, in your lineups, because, I mean, I had 33% exposure to Devontae Adams. I had 24% exposure to Chris Godwin. They didn't get there, but I believe that I would not have changed my decisions because I'm playing in the play action in the $9 slant, looking at the ownership. But if you did that in the higher stakes, technically, if you had known that so many more people were going to go Galaxy Brain, go to the other game, like, truthfully, I don't think you play Adams Godwin at that ownership in an 11-game slate. Like, I think you don't. I don't think that's efficient. I think now they become the chalk.
I opened the my DraftKings app a little bit after the noon game started just to check ownership, and I saw so I didn't play the expensive running. Like, I didn't play any of the expensive running backs in tournaments, and so we'll get to where this gets really tilting. But that was part of my thought is, okay, people are playing all those 7K running backs, right? And then everybody wanted to play all these different, even like Jonathan Taylor and all these, whatever, James Robinson. People had all these guys that were more expensive running backs. And I wanted to play those wide receivers if everybody else was playing. If you're playing Derrick Henry and Chase Claypool, I wanted to play Devontae Adams and Myles Gaskin, right? Type of like that concept. So that was my approach. So I went after the Vikings and Falcons game because they had a lot of, it was a explosive game stack with some leverage points and superstar wide receivers that fit perfectly with, the build came together perfectly. And then I did the same thing, like you said, with Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin, because it was, okay, this is maybe the highest scoring game of the weekend. Nobody's playing these two guys.
Nobody, quote unquote, nobody. It turns out that everybody did.
Literally everybody. I pivoted to the chalkiest because I thought I was being sneaky. But I mean, it is crazy, and I think, and so then in turn, the last point on that, then in turn it makes the Myles Gaskin is what? The highest owned running back in the luxury box?
Yeah, he was 33%. He was higher owned than Madison, Davis, or Henry.
And it made everybody played the Dolphins defense. So now everybody has this same, I can, even if you think the Dolphins defense is chalk, I can play Gaskin with it and get the correlation, or vice versa, right? Whatever. All these plays that you're like, that we talked about it last week, that a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, were like these next level sharp plays that are advantages in tournaments have become the opposite. And
well, there are advantages in the tournaments that I'm playing.
Yeah. And it was the absolute. So anyway, I checked the ownership and I'm like, Derrick Henry is what? like 29. I'm like, that feels kind of low. And I'm like, Mike Davis 30, Madison 30. I'm like, none of these guys pop. Usually you can't always guess exactly who it is in like these smaller fields, but usually one or two of those like super chalky guys pop like way up, get up to 50 or something like that. And that kind of tells you the build. And I'm just looking through all this and I'm like, yeah. And then Thielen's 20, like these guys are owned, obviously. I mean, they're the best.
Yeah, but they're not super owned. Typically in smaller fields, like you see a guy that's 30% owned, 28%, like a Mike Davis would be 28% owned in the Wildcat, and then like in the luxury box he'd be 40% owned, right?
Exactly.
Like you see AJ Brown in the play action would be 21%, and in the luxury box he'd be 38%. And then you'd know where people went from there, especially with the late games. And you probably looked at that and go, no, this is about equal to what it should be. So where did people go? And then the late games lock, and you're like, everyone went with me.
Yeah, you're sitting on Devontae Adams, Myles Gaskin, and Chris Godwin, and you're like, shit, all these guys are not. Nobody popped off for high ownership, and so I'm just like, well, that was a mistake. And not a mistake in like it was a mistake in projecting the ownership, right?
Right, but that's the only thing that you could do. So this is the weird way. This is why like Henry was a fish play. Those types of things are thinking in terms of players and not lineups and contests. So for instance, it would be the correct decision had we known this and had you known this information. If you were playing low stakes contests, if you were playing the dollar or whatever. If you played Adams and Godwin and you played something like that, I think you made a good decision. I think that was proper. But and in the lower stakes, what was more popular than that? Fitzpatrick and Parker.
Really?
Parker, Crowder. I take a look at his ownership on the luxury on the play action, like James Crowder was 16% owned. Right? I mean, like Devontae Parker was 11% owned. Fitzpatrick was the highest owned quarterback in the lowest stakes. The thing is that in the lowest stakes, they were overowned. Like, that's where you play Gaskin. But the funny part is that you know what the sharp play was in the luxury box? To play Fitzpatrick, Parker, and Crowder. Like, right. These are the concepts that, like, once you get these concepts where, like, I just named, like, here are the guys that you should definitely, like, if I was on a show and the people that were listening were playing the large field, small entry contest, I'd be like, you got to fade the Dolphins passing game. You got play Gaskin and the Dolphins defense together because everyone's playing the 7K running backs. And I would be correct. And then if I was doing the show in front of people that are playing the Wildcat and luxury box, I go, everyone's playing Gaskin and the Dolphins defense. Why don't you stack that game? Maybe the Jets could be competitive. And they both would be correct. Mm-hmm. Like it's different players, different contests. One decision I'm sure every sharp player looks at this ownership in the luxury box and thought the same thing and go, oh, everyone went, oh, oops. Like maybe I should have just stacked the hell out of the Atlanta, Minnesota, and the Tennessee game. But I played more Watson stacks. Played the other side that more people did in the lower stakes. Because the comparative ownership is the contest it's dramatically different. We're talking about disparities of 2x. Adams was at 28% in the luxury box and 15% in the play action. I mean, like, we're talking about like ridiculous. Godwin was barely on the radar in lower stakes, and he's coming in as one of the top wide receivers. That's where you have to figure out what the efficient ownership of a player is for a specific contest. And every contest is different. And most of the people out there play lower stakes. I mean, like even I don't play in the Wildcat and the luxury box. I mean, I do play in the Power Sweep and the Spy, but those are 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 entry contests. I mean, they're not small. But like since 90+% deal with that, like the game. You're literally, we said it last week, right, Eric? Playing in the higher stakes and the lower stakes, especially in a high liquid sport like NFL, is almost like two different games.
It is. It's great. I mean, this conversation is so refreshing because it really is. It's crazy, and all content and all ownership projections and all that is geared towards like even talking to Jamino and people that put a lot more work and are a lot smarter about it than I am, it's projecting for milli maker, slant, whatever, lower stakes, large field, the more casual user. And like I don't want to say I get upset. That's not the right term, but I see this, right? Exactly what we're talking about. I'm like, dude, you are so like, I'm using your ownership, and like I make my own personal, pivots off of it with some of this kind of stuff that we're talking about. But in general, you have to have a baseline, and I'm using a baseline from some of these sites, and it's like, it's become difficult because you have to second, third level thinking like, okay, this is the baseline that everyone's working off of, right?
Right.
So,
And
Empire Maker
it's the
and
same reason,
Osimo.
Eric, that I say that I listen to a ton of shows throughout the week. I mean, I have no life. I'm sitting in front of a computer. I put it on like it's talk radio. But I
Yeah.
know that like I'm playing large field, low stakes contests. And I know that most of the listeners of shows are people that play in low stakes,
Mhm.
large field contests. Wakey Wakey ain't listening to the morning grind. I mean, like Petty, it's like the high stakes pros, like I mean, maybe they listen, but I mean, and maybe they're listening for the same reason because they're playing 150 milli entries, and they're
Yeah.
seeing where the field goes. But at the higher stakes, when you play the luxury box with an 11 entry max at $3,000, like you ain't getting casual money in that,
No.
right? You may get a whale here
But
or
that's
there, but everyone's looking at the same thing. So, like, I think you need to take more into account that well, everyone's looking at this, so what are they thinking, and then how do I outthink that, until at least it starts tilting kind of in the other direction where people are at least realize. I just don't think many people are realizing that. I mean, you could tell just by this Green Bay Tampa Bay ownership. We could tell when the Cowboys went under owned after they were chalking the low stakes. We see this
Mhm.
week after week that uh, I mean, I'm not playing in those higher stakes contests, so I don't have to worry about it as much. But it's always interesting to look and go when I'm playing my spy and my power sweep lineups that like I have to think that there are more entries than I would normally expect that are finding leverage in the
Yeah.
same way that I'm identifying. And I'm not doing anything revolutionary. Like me and you, I mean, we're pointing out the same things that we saw. We didn't talk
Yeah.
to each other before at all. And we could build the same. We're looking at it the same exact way, and a lot of sharp players are looking at it the same exact way. I just don't think at the higher stakes, people are doing that, going, "I'm going to be sneaky," and then not realizing that no, 90% of your opponents are also trying to be sneaky. So, so you have to, even if you do go in that direction, you have to at least take that into account when you start building your lineup. So I'm hope, and you know what's going to happen, Eric? Next week, everyone's going to be right in the higher stakes. Everyone's going to be like, well, "This is the sneaky spot," but everyone's going to go there, so I'm not going to play it. And it comes in like 3% owned, and it is sneaky, and it goes off. Right? It's going to be one of those types of things.
It has been an unbelievably hard balance because, like, you and I have talked about this now. I've like started to not started to figure this out, but I've started to have this feeling, and I listen to, like, you listen to probably like the Oni and those guys, and he's talked about it. Drew's talked about it. Everybody that's a sharper GPP player has kind of started to see this trend, right? And like Leone and Drew have like a little bit similar of Drew's playing 150 max contest, and Leone's playing a little bit more like me, so they're having these similar kind of conversations. So all of this different conversation, us talking about it, them talking about it, me seeing it play out in the ownerships, like I've started to realize it, but applying it into my process on a week to week basis has undoubtedly been a struggle for me, as proven by Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin this week. It was last week we talked about with the Cowboys thing, and I ultimately decided on the Chiefs. We talked about that last week. I ultimately decided on the Chiefs, and I don't think that was necessarily wrong, but there's reasons why someone could argue with me that maybe I didn't make the most optimal decision. And then this week, I know I didn't make the most optimal decision, at least on the lineup that I went with, the Adams Godwin concept. And so I think, now you look back on it, Tuesday morning quarterback, and I see, well, yeah, of course it makes sense. Everybody started with this baseline ownership projection that we're all like, everybody had, these guys are all very sharp, but we're basically all starting with pick the site. They're all pretty much the same ownership projections, right? Rotogrinders, ETR, whoever. We all look at that, and then we all take the next step. Okay, everybody's playing, the Thielen and AJ Brown and whatever, and everybody's paying up for running back. So I'm just going to play Devontae Adams. It's like, okay, you have to like process how real is this? How real are 20 out of these 200 people in this contest going to actually make that pivot? And it's like this total mind fuck that you're applying to yourself. Like, okay, this seems like the right thing to do, but exactly how many people are gonna make that pivot? And on a week to week basis, it is a difficult thing to analyze. But I'm starting to lean kind of like you said towards, that third level where assuming until they prove me differently, assuming that everyone is making those kind of like obvious GPP pivots.
Right, but that's why you could still exploit that in the lower stakes.
Yeah,
like
right.
That's why I don't care as much about that. I'm thinking didn't I say this last week that like my skill at poker was always beating average players. Like I was always like against good players. Like I'm a nit, so if I see a table full of good players, I just don't play. Just like I just don't see my edge there. And a table full of bad players, like if you're playing in a DFS contest with tons of bad players that literally can't identify the best value, right? They have no clue why AJ Brown is a good value or why Chase Claypool was fine. I mean, like that cash. If you can't identify a cash construction, you're gonna be horrible at GPPs because now you're just like, how do you identify anything? Like against those types of players, you have to play the best line. You're going to win more often than not by just, I'm going to play the best stack, right? I'm still, because it's still a progressive toward, let's say I'm playing against 100 bad players. Like I'm still going to put correlation in, right? I'm not going to play just my cash lineup, but I'm going to play the best cash lineup with 3+1. Like what is the best 3+1? And then fill in the rest of the spots with the best projected plays. Like literally, you're going to beat bad players that way. Now, average players know enough about how to build GPP lineups that now you could start looking for leverage. Now everyone's going to play this guy. I'm going to play. They're going to go. I'm going to stack with Thielen. Right? They're going. Thielen's a good play. I'm going to play Cousins, Thielen, Irv Smith. Right? They do that. Like so, They know at least to do that in GPP. And now I'm going to take advantage of the average player by going. Well, I'm going to stack the other side of the game with Ryan and Julio and play Justin Jefferson. Right?
Yep.
Completely again negatively correlated to that. Because I need to realize that people are going to play that correlation. People are going to play Stafford, Golladay, and Hawkinson. So like once I know that people understand stacking enough, now I'm going to go, okay, what's negatively correlated to to that stack that benefits when that stack fails. But and you could do that against average players. Against the top players, we already know all of this. I mean, like, I'm not going to get an advantage because people are going to find those leverage points and exploit them way more often. But because more people are exploiting them, then the pivots, those leverage pivots, get more ownership. The only thing I was shocked more in the luxury box was the Jefferson ownership. I guess people just didn't want to stack that. People were more likely in the higher stakes to just get off the game or play a little bit more Julio as a one-off. Like they would play Thielen. They would play Thielen and Julio together, right? They would do that instead of Ridley because Ridley was more expensive at 7,800, and people were playing Devontae Adams at 8,000, so they could fit in Ridley with these cheap running backs. So, like, I see where the leverage went because Julio in the luxury box was 14%. In the play action, he was 7%. Okay?
Yep.
Look how it's a 2x disparity in ownership. So, but Justin Jefferson, on the other hand, was actually higher owned in the low stakes. I mean, not by that much. I'm looking here in results DB. Justin Jefferson in the luxury box was 10%. In the play action was 13%. Because that was the chalky game. So people were the lower stakes average players were just like, I think this is the best game. I'm going to stack it. And that's all. They at least know to stack. I mean, obviously there are plenty of dead lineups in there with no stacks and, just mishmash of garbage. But in the higher stakes, you can't get away with just, I think that's the best game and stack it. Until everyone thinks that, and then you just go, I'm I guess the Cowboys and the opposing, I'm gonna play the obvious thing that whatever. So it's really a context matters
Yeah.
so much, and that's why obviously on Twitter when you only have 200 such characters that like the nuance of those subjects like kind of goes out the window because how much can you debate in the span of 2 sentences?
Yeah. And it's funny that you bring up Julio because that was another play. That was another play that I made. Exact same concept where, okay, like, you described it perfectly, and then he comes in, 15% or whatever, and you're just like, so yeah, it's good to talk about this because it's something that is a struggle, but it's the perfect illustration between, you talk about it, I talk about it, between contests and just how important that is. Like what you just outlined, I don't even know if people understand the gravity of the difference between 7% and almost 15%,
right?
or whatever.
How stupid? Because look, 'cause
13,
most people look at what I said before. Fitzpatrick, Parker, Crowder, skinny stack. If you played that in lower stakes, what a fish play! You're a fish. It's fucking you play Gaskin in the Dolphins defense. What are you, stupid? And then I look at the higher stakes and go, Gaskin in the Dolphins defense? What are you, a fish? Right? Playing 33% owned Myles Gaskin and a 37% owned defense? Are you stupid? You should have just played Devontae Parker and James Crowder. You know how, to normal people, it sounds stupid because it's like, well, how could one be a good play? Because people are thinking in terms of how do I predict what the players are going to do, rather than how do I predict what my opponents are going to do.
Yeah, and it's a real, like, I'm excited to see like what happens with it this upcoming week because it continues to play itself out like this, but every week is different. Every week is so nuanced that it does. I haven't had a very good NFL season. I think I've struggled with like we talk about this and like we both understand these different concepts that we're talking about, and honestly, that's what's made me successful in the past is understanding these leverage points and how to construct teams, blah blah blah. But now that's just like the ante in these tournaments, and now it's this like galaxy brain thinking of figuring out exactly where it's a market, right? The ownership on all these players is a market that's very drastically different at the higher stakes, because everybody is just as smart, but everybody used to jam in still. Like that was my advantage. Like you talked about against average players. I'm not trying to say that these guys are the best players in the world. They weren't average players, but they didn't take say the luxury box is serious, because these $3,000, or even if they're multi-entering the luxury box, to these people is nothing. To me, it's something, but to them, it's not really anything. They got more, they have more money in head-to-heads and leagues and all that kind of stuff across both sites to care about $6,000 of luxury box entries. So they're jamming in their best teams. Used to. Now that has evolved, and they are doing this. Okay, well, I'll pivot to the Adams, Godwin type stuff, and it has been something, for me personally, playing against all these people, that I was able to kind of take advantage of those leverage points really easily in the past, and it was successful. And now it's a little bit different ball game. And so I think we're getting, the Thielens and, like you said, Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parkers, whatever, at higher stakes coming in. It's sometimes about right what they should be, sometimes maybe a little bit lower, but they're not unowned. And then you have the pivots that are just a little bit higher owned, but balancing that on a week to week basis. And what does that mean for making the optimal decisions? I think it's something that's still been, a struggle for me. And I know a lot of people that I talk to are playing, smaller field stuff, not necessarily the luxury box, but I do think it's relatively applicable across all small fields, maybe not to the extent, of Devontae Adams being one of the chalkiest players on the slate across all small fields. But I do think it's really applicable, for a lot of casual users that are just playing a couple of teams in some smaller field stuff that, should be a lot more of your process than, say, it used to be. It's not, the Jefferson one was a good example. That was one that I did think, I legitimately was like, this is one of those that's going to happen. It ended up being Julio. It was the opposite, but I thought, okay, I'm going to play the Atlanta receivers, and people are going to try this leverage point, and Jefferson's going to be 18% or something like that, right? Was like one that I actually had that thought. Now I was wrong, but that was, I'm trying to next level this, but I think you have to, and I'm not, I haven't figured out exactly how to apply it perfectly just yet, but
it's very similar. It's very similar to poker about balancing your ranges, even with your actions. So, for instance, just because obviously, theory of daily fantasy sports, very, a parody-ish type of take on theory of poker. I mean, that's how I'm influenced primarily by 2+2 and the poker from the 2000s era. That we see with continuation bets. I'm using a very simple example. The continuation bet in poker, a C bet, is when you're the pre-flop raiser and you're in first position against a sole opponent, and on the flop, 2/3 of the time you miss the flop, but both opponents will miss the flop, and whoever bets first wins, typically. I'm talking about especially like the lower levels of like no limit type of play. So you have players. This is what thinking like average players. Like average players will think in terms of, well, I bet pre-flop, I'm going to bet on the flop every time, right? Because most of the time my opponent's going to, more than half the time my opponent's going to fold. So they always do it. It doesn't matter if they have ace, king, ace. It doesn't matter. They're going to bet literally, nearly 100% of the time. And then you have other average players that are like, if I miss the flop with ace, king, like they check. Like they only bet if they hit or they have the overpair or whatever. It's very polarized of like either they do one a lot more than the other. It may not be 100%, but it's like a 90-10 type of thing. Once you could expose that, once you are observant enough of that, then it's so much easier to play hands against them on the flop because like that if they're 90% of the time going to bet one hit, I could look at the texture of the board and go, I could much better predict the range of his hands. I could now either outplay him. I could make more money when I do, hit my hand because I know what he had. Like my expected value of the hand goes way up. My implied odds go way up, or my fold equity. I mean, like I know that if a scare card comes out, I may be able to raise him off the hand with a draw or something. I know a lot more if they're a 90-10 type of person in both directions. Good players balance that out where I've confused people in the average stakes where like I'm C betting like 60% of the time. So it's like even if and I'm in my head randomizing like, well, he saw this opponent. This is why I play live poker, because you could see who's at your table for hours at a time and go, this opponent saw me bet continuation bet and have a hand. So like the next time I'm going to bet without a hand with ace king.
Right.
They're more likely to think that I have a hand. And if I've gotten caught a couple of times, maybe I do the reverse. But against average players, sometimes I have ace king and it's ace 2-4 and whatever, and I check in first to act, and I literally check, especially on boards that are not scary. Like I'm giving the free card, especially if I'm playing against a lower stack opponent that I'm not like deep in. Like if I lose $1,000 in my stack on the hand, I'll throw in some checks here and there, even though I have, and then maybe I get paid off because maybe I check with the ace king, and my opponent has ace jack, and my check causes him to bet, going, dude doesn't have the ace. So I have the best ace. And then I call him, and then I make more money by having my opponent take it because he was confused by the in the beginning. Because I'm balancing it enough that that my opponent has to reassess. And I know how an average player thinks. So, like, I know what they're looking at and what they're thinking about. And they think in terms of, like, you always see bet and you never see bet or something. But good players don't think that way. They think of, how often do I do this? How often, like those types of things. What range of hands do I do this with, right? They raise pre-flop with actually a suited connector, and then the board comes ace garbage, and they're betting because, they have a virtually worthless hand that has no draw and 8 high, and they're just going to guess on the fact that there's only 3 more aces out in the deck, and, they're last to act, that your opponent checked, and you're just going to win the pot right there more often than not than you should be betting like 80 to 90% of the time. So this is kind of the poker equivalent of balancing your lineup ranges, that you have to take into consideration that in the lower stakes that people are, everyone on the show say that these 2 games are great to target. So I'm going to play the great to target games. And then I'm like, okay, thank you for giving me obvious leverage points. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I can better predict the ownership, so I know how I can build my lineups with the proper amount of leverage for the contest. Oh, thank you for letting me know. But then at the higher stakes, you kind of have to you have to balance your lineup decision making, where you go, well, they think that I think that I think, like those types of things, and you're not going to know what direction that's going to be on a given slate, because it could be like the sharp play, like you said, at the higher stakes could have been the Ryan stack instead of the Godwin's Adams. Maybe you look at Godwin's Adams and they come in at 15 and 8% owned, and like everyone and then you see Alexander Madison at 18% ownership, right?
Right.
You see one of those where it's like, once you see Alexander Madison at 18%, you're like, how many Justin Jefferson lineups are out there? How many Julio lineups are out there? Because that would be the obvious leverage on that. But once you see 31% Madison, uh-oh. You go, uh-oh,
Yep.
that leverage point was not the one that was the most popular. So, I mean, I know a lot of people don't play those contests, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not, like, even me, myself, I don't concern myself that much about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like you said, it highlights so brightly, shining on a big light, how the lineups you build are directly related to the contests that you play. And that, like, just looking at just projections and ownership and just the best plays type of stuff, like, that's not what wins these contests. It's the game theory. I know I've just brought the game theory of it, but why not bring up the course? Because, like I said before, there's no better marketing than winning, because literally that's what I do. I mean, that's people. I put out the video of how I built whatever. Well, what were your 3 best plays? I'm like, no best plays. I nothing. My best play was Justin Jefferson. Like that. Truthfully, that was the leverage and the Ryan stuff. Like the one that won it for me, the Julio Jefferson. I would consider that the best play, but they're not the best. They're not, in a vacuum. They're not the best plays. They're the best plays for leverage.
Right.
But they're not the highest probability plays.
That lineup still could have won if Julio and Jefferson were just average, but T. Higgins and Brandon Cooks went for 40 or whatever,
right.
or 30 or what. Like, and then you would say, we talk about it and we beat that horse to death constantly, right? But there are just so few people that even still really get it. And I will never consider myself like an expert in any of this kind of stuff.
I'm learning. If I talk to myself from a year or two ago, and I use these game theory concepts. I've been using it since I started playing. Like, but I've gotten so much better at projecting ownership and projecting what people are going to do, like, and experience in lineup building, hand building, as well as with a lineup builder, and go, okay, I see where I went wrong in this lineup. I should have correlated this way, or I got a little too much leverage there, or a little too little. Like, you learn so much by doing, and then studying just studying other players. And you go, especially the ones that think more like me. And I go, how do I find? Because sometimes in the large field, like you said, they're playing so much volume that it's like it's a battle of projection models, and just like they're playing the highest ceiling probability stuff, and obviously they have a contrarian ranking. They have some type of leverage in the larger field stuff, and they're scaling it down by there. But it's more of I believe I have the most accurate projections. I'm going to calculate ceiling probability. I'm going to calculate ownership. I believe that my calculations are 2% better than yours, and I'm going to play 300,000 in volume today, and I'm going to get a 2% return, and I'm going to play the afternoon slate the same way, and I'm going to play the NBA.
Yep.
I'm going to play everything that way, and 2% ends up being at the end of the year they have $750,000, and they're great, and that's a great living to have. But that's not the only way to play. And if your strength is not in modeling, if your strength is not in that, where you're not going to be able to beat Osimo's model, you're not going to be able to beat Brian Hooper Brick's background in that. Like they're years ahead of me. Like I could get that good, but I mean I'm playing DFS now, right? So, like, how do I take advantage of that? Knowing, and it's the third level stuff. I know what their projections probably. I know Galladay's projected higher. I know this, and I'm purposely not playing him, like because I know that. I know Thielen is projected high. That's why I'm not playing it. Rather than I'm playing 7 million lineups and like if they fit, they fit like. Yeah, they're the high probability plays. I'll play them in some lineups, but once you learn what projections are and how other people use them, like especially like average players use projections by what are the best lineups. Let me make 150. Click. I set a couple of settings and I press 150, and like yeah, of course you have a ton of Madison and you have a ton of Davis and you have a ton of AJ Brown. And thank you for donating by playing like non-leverage lineups in a large field GPP. Like it's beautiful. Unless you're gonna need to score 330 points to win this week if those lineups do well. I'm gonna win with 253. Right? You need 300 plus in order to win with your lineups. I need 250 in order to win with mine, and it's not based solely on who are the best plays. So if anyone has any questions, you could always submit them. Questions at theoryofdfs.com. It goes to me. Or you could always DM me or on Twitter or Eric on Twitter. Eric's at, Erik Beimfohr?
Yep.
Beimfohr.
Nice and simple. My name.
Right, but people get the I and the E mixed up, and they don't know.
I know.
People get that stuff mixed up. Then the people on the YouTube channel, on my YouTube video, just finally realized that it's Blender Head and not Blender HD. But that's perfectly fine. You could, hey... I came in first for $50,000. Call me whatever you want. I do not care what you call me. Doesn't matter. Blenderhead, Blendered. Some people are like, oh, I thought it's Blendered with an H or something. Who knows? But you could send those questions in. If you have any not play. People will troll me by sending in. I'll check the inbox and I'll be like, do I play Kamara or Thomas this week? And I'll be like, oh, let me block that guy. Right? We don't do that shit. And like I said, if you're interested in buying the audio course, it's 15 hours long. It's me and James McCool. We discuss all of these concepts. What you listen to me and Eric discuss, like the general concepts. We talk primarily of the application because we're coming off of a slate where we could see the context of everything. But all these concepts, how to apply them, you could learn all of that base stuff in the masterclass. Theoryofdfs.com. And I was also on the Takecast. You could listen to the last episode with Davis Maddock. And we talk a little bit more general concepts. And there's also a promo code in there. So if you just search in iTunes for the Takecast, spelled wrong, TAEK cast. And because I'm not going to just tell you what the promo code is, because the whole point is for you to listen to the podcast. That's like the marketing end of it, right? Yeah. And there's no better marketing than winning.